Good morning, everybody. I am Dale Jablonsky from Performance Technology Partners. We call ourselves PTP. PTP, our specialty is Government 2.0 when you really get down to it, because we have the best customer experience program, the best security program. I run an enterprise portfolio management, which helps you free up money so you can invest in Government 2.0. And we do analytics, which is important in any Government 2.0 model, because for you to truly be online and self-service and offering the right experience to your customers, you have to have insights into what your customers really want. So this is a analytics presentation. The feedback we've gotten in these presentations is that there's a lot of minutia that we're going over, so I have brought handouts which seem to help. I have not dumbed down the slides. They are the same. The slides are the same as the handouts. When I'm talking about business intelligence, I find that to be oxymoronic to dumb down the presentation when you're talking about intelligence. So we are going to keep this very, very smart. And you can write all the notes. And like Russ said at the beginning of the keynote, there is a lot of data here. We don't expect you to fully understand all this stuff, but we do have our contact information and we can follow up and we could have deeper conversations, okay? So we're gonna talk about just what big data is in its relationship to big analytics. This is about an analytic program. We're gonna also talk about what your profile may be. So how many of you work for government? Raise your hands. Okay, so the rest of you probably work in the private sector. So out of those people that just raised their hands, how many of you represent the business? And then raise your hands if you represent the IT side. Okay, so dominant IT. I'm going to talk to the business people a lot in here, but there's going to be another poll later on in this presentation. So there's a little bit of a buzz going on about big data. A lot of buzz, right? It's everywhere, you know. It doesn't help this concept when NSA is caught, you know, pretty much harvesting every big data source on the planet, you know, trying to find bad people. But that notion of finding bad people certainly applies to fraud. Now there it applies to, you know, espionage and terrorism and stuff like that, but some of those same concepts hold true to you guys in terms of if you have a fraud scenario you need to look at, there's certainly bad people out there doing bad things and you should know about it, and big data is a certain part of that. So we're going to try to separate a little bit of the buzz from the reality, because there is some reality checks when you get into big data. If you haven't been doing your analytics program very long, big data is kind of an advanced feature, and PT believes you need to work your way up the big data ladder, but we certainly don't want you to not harvest some big data low-hanging fruit that's out there. It's just, there's some caveats we're going to talk about. Does anyone see I like big data and cannot lie? So just to get all on the same page of what big data is, if there was a definition out there, this is the same thing. I just want to add to it that it's not only large and voluminous and complex and unstructured, but the traditional definition says I really go out and get it from social media and all kinds of other crazy stores that I've never shopped at before. But in this conference, we are California. And this conference believes that there is a conference definition of big data that is beyond this, and it's called all of your legacy data you have, which is 25 to 30% of the total data in government at the national level, right? Because we are California, we are the 7th largest economy in the world, and just our data alone, and some of you in big departments know that you're already dealing with big data concepts because you're not Vermont, you're not Delaware, you're not Nevada, you are California. And I don't care if you're California State or if you're LA County, you still have problems with big data, right? So, now MODOK, you might not have as much data. So, Okay, so that's the definition. And then now we're going to just try to level set everybody on what analytics is. Okay, so there's two concepts in analytics. There's the looking backwards concept, which is where all your business intelligence is kind of a beginning. This is a progression. This is an evolution. And then there's advanced analytics, where you have many more dimensions to your data. So the difference is that data is not as dimensional at the bottom here. See if I can do that. And then as you work your way up this maturity continuum, where you're not just looking at what has happened or what you're going to do next week, but what you really want to be when you grow up, then you have many more dimensions to that data. And again, you don't get to the blue without having done some trials and tribulations through the green and the orange. Okay, so I'm going to ask you kind of in a few minutes, where are you in this ladder, so to speak? And I like my sessions as interactive as possible, so if you have questions, raise your hand. I don't have probably 45 minutes worth of material here, so if you don't raise your hand, we're going to get done early. Maybe. Okay, so another understanding of analytics, again, thinking about that continuum that was on the previous page, thinking about the business intelligence along the edge here versus the analytics. Understanding what descriptive is really looking at yesterday, last year. Now this really helps when you get 20, 30 years worth of data in your store, because looking back is very, very powerful for getting into the predictive. So the more data you have going back, the more you can get into predictive analytics and determining what's happening next, but then getting prescriptive. You know, getting to that optimization feature where you know now that the informed decisions you made, and informed means you used all of this intelligence and analytics, the informed decisions you made last year, 2 years, 3 years ago are actually delivering better results because you can measure it than without that informed data. So that's where you really get into prescriptive. Okay, does everyone understand that notion now? That I have been using much more powerful decision-making capabilities, and now, because of time, I know that those decisions have improved my outcomes. I can measure it. And that's where government traditionally has not been able to do that. So that's the big leap forward, to know that you can measure the goodness of your data and your decisions. Now some people say, you know, when I show up and start analyzing their systems, they say they have analytics, but they're still stuck on a relational model. So we're trying to also draw out the difference that if you have a transaction system and the data model is largely the traditional, highly normalized, maybe not this normalized, you know, usually have an address record with street and city and zip. But if you really want to analyze a system that has 10 million addresses in it and you want to find out, you know, certain things, you might have to go to extreme normalization where every character or every field in an address is its own record. But this is not intelligence. This is still OLTP, transactional models. And if that's what you have, then you're not really doing analytics. You need multidimensional data, completely different data models. It isn't just the joining of data and the combining of multiple sources, but it is truly that denormalized model that means you're investing in analytics. Okay? So just so we all are understanding what analytics is, I wanted to get that out. Because I have seen government entities think they're doing analytics and they're just getting reporting out of a transactional store. Okay. All right, so understanding big data analytics. So, again, another maturity continuum. So your data size, as it goes up from large to big to ginormous, from petabytes to exabytes to zettabytes, as you try to increase your analytic capabilities up that continuum from reactive to proactive, and you start doing not just analytics, but big analytics and big data analytics out here, there are some phenomenons that happen. Okay, and you're probably going to hear about some of those phenomenons today. But a lot of your computing models change. So as you start out on your journey, we said this is an evolution, and business intelligence requires one set of tools. Some of those tools, they're expensive to get into big data, but you can use them along the whole way. But your tool sets change, because you can't, in big data, you can't necessarily house all the data in your own system. You can't necessarily go out and buy, exabytes worth of storage. So you have to start deploying other models. Now, there are 10 other sessions at this big data conference where there are unbelievably good vendors. It's not an executive session, it's a techie session for techies. They will tell you how they can save you money on this advanced model out here. So the Splunks of the world, the SASs of the world, the Commvaults of the world, the VMwares of the world, they have ways to minimize your cost, because your cost models and your tool models change, is what we're really trying to say, as you go from this level all out to this level. So there is an investment that you need to be considering if you are the business people or if you're the IT people trying to justify this. And we're going to talk a lot about investing here in a few more minutes. Any questions? No. All right. So this is the last slide just to get us all on the same page, and that as analytic programs mature and as you start taking advantage of them, hang it, I gotta get my little button down here. As you start taking advantage of the decision-making power and the power of analytics, you also have this data phenomenon. And let's say that's not really today. That's like 3 years ago. Today's kind of here, and if you could draw this out, this is an exponential curve, right? As we saw in some of the other slides today, like at the keynote, this thing's blowing through the roof in terms of what's happening in the big data arena. So it's all happening concurrently, and I think the message of this conference is you not only need to get your analytics program going, but you need to get your analytics program going fast enough so you can take advantage of big data. So we're going to do another question and answer session. So I have 3 profiles here. Profile 1 is you have not invested a lot of money in analytics. Don't really have those separate analytical systems. Profile 2 is you've invested in analytics, but you've done it on a case-by-case basis to get some ROI out of particular scenarios. So you have multiple analytic systems. You do not have an enterprise model. And then profile 3 is you've invested a ton of money in analytics. You have a team of 10, 15 people that's all they do, and you have one enterprise data warehouse, and you're using that single data warehouse for every possible analytical scenario that faces your department or agency. So if you are number 1 and haven't invested a lot, raise your hand. Okay. If you are number 2 where you have made significant investments, you have a team, but it is not enterprise, raise your hand. And if you are number 3 and you have a single investment, a team of 10, 20 people, and it is a single solution for the entire enterprise, raise your hand. All right, I didn't expect to see any there, but that's good. Okay, so you can leave. Now, just joking. Just joking. So, but that's what this is all about, because there are a couple paths you can go down here. There's the 3 profiles, and as you notice, unless you're in profile 2 or 3, you really don't have a sustainability problem, because you haven't made any investments if you're in profile 1, and therefore there's nothing to sustain, right? But the minute you start making significant investments, And there were some people that raised their hand in 2. So what is your curve going from 1 to 3? Is it, you know, way down here and then you finally have to rework a lot of your investment to get to a single enterprise solution? Or are you going to go from 1 straight to 3? Or are you going to maybe slice a corner off 2 because you want to do some quick wins? You do have some users who want to invest, but they don't believe in the enterprise model and they want their own single analytical system. You might do that for a while. I mean, the realities of government and politics and things kind of dictate, you know, a lot of paths, of which very rare are they the optimum path. But what we're going to talk about is this optimum path of not only going out, getting the investment dollars, but doing it right the first time, avoiding as much of square 2 as possible. Or if you are in square 2, how do I get to square 3 where I get to an enterprise system? So, because there's huge power in an enterprise system, and we're going to talk about that in a little bit. So does all that make sense, jive? Any questions? So, okay. Where? Ah. She wants to know what this would typically cost. Well, let's just say you're starting out and you want to build your first analytical system. I know at CalPERS, we had a little bit of hardware. We didn't have to buy all of our hardware. We had already had invested, what, in Cognos? Like $7 million one time and like, you know, $1 million a year ongoing for a while. Never used it though. So we had some hardware, we had some software, but we still coughed out about $1 million of IT controllable budget, and then the business people got hooked, and I think they're starting to invest $3 to $4 million a year in this now. And that is hardware, software, and people, mostly people. So they're adding staff to IT, they're adding maybe even redirecting some business staff to be dedicated to this function, because this is a union between IT and the business that's not like other systems. This is much more you need to be cohabitating this space, you need to be working together. There needs to be a much stronger partnership. So it can, now CalPERS understands investments better than a lot of government entities do. And as long as you can say, hey, I'm going to give you some return, and there is a return here, they are ready to invest, because that's what they do for a living, right? They have a $270 billion portfolio, and they know they got to invest that, and they can't just put it under a mattress somewhere, all right? They ain't going to get any return. So their mentality is set up for this. I'm not sure that every government entity has that mentality. Maybe Treasury invests, certainly CalSTRS, certainly, you know, LA County Pension, and any pension and organization would understand this. But the rest of it is it's an argument that you have to make, and it's a little bit of a culture difference, and we'll talk about that too. Does that answer your question? I was nebulous, right? So, a couple $1 million. How's that? First year. So. Again, thinking about whether I'm a 1, 2, or 3, this is a progression you have to go through. You don't go from a 1 to the most enlightened, optimized, you know, shop on the planet. There is this evolution, and all we're saying is that it would be best for you to start your journey now, get this going. It's unavoidable, it's very iterative. And if you keep that end game in mind of an enterprise, you certainly will progress faster up this model at a lower cost. So the reroute through 2 does raise your cost, just so you know that, okay? The direct access to 3 is a much better formula. And there's all kinds of pitfalls on achieving that. So we'll talk about that. A lot of it's culture, a lot of it is overprotective business people that believe that some statute that was written in 1950 still applies to the protection of their data. And, you know, it's almost like muskets applied to defense. It's a different world now, and you got to understand that things are changing. So, So here are the challenges that you're going to have to overcome to get to 3. I don't care if you're in 2 or 1, you're going to have to overcome some significant challenges. A lot of this is, I am too busy fighting alligators day to day that I don't possibly have any time or any money to do something strategic. And you'll get that from IT people. I've heard this excuse so many times, and I have so many good answers for it. But you will get that excuse. You will get it from business people. So, and the higher up the food chain you go, the more strategic they are supposed to be, right? And so you have to challenge people to spend a certain amount of their time being strategic and not being operational or just tactical. So you do need a certain amount of executive aha here. And I think Karen can certainly lead that charge because she certainly has had aha moments. There are some executives, I think CalPERS executives have had some aha moments recently with some of the power of this. And it does take that executive level leadership. Again, we talked about being committed to a persistent level of iterating our way through this. There's no big bang. I mean, even big bang's dangerous on regular transactional re-engineering, right? We've seen some big bangs not do so well. Well, let's spend 3 years on requirements, 2 years on design, we'll code for 4 years, and 8 years from now, we'll tell you what your system looks like, right? Doesn't work. It's got to be very, very iterative, and you have to commit to that. And you don't know what you don't know in this arena if you're starting out. And so you have to commit to a learning process, not just an iterative process, but an iterative learning process. And there is no other way. Okay. Everyone gets smarter and more intelligent through every iteration you do. And I know some of you are believers in iterative development because I know in your private life or in your real life you do development. And agile is the way to go. So now we're going to talk about the right way, the best practice, the path to 3 is kind of the next few slides. So it starts with some visioning. It starts with, even though you don't know what you don't know, you got to put something down on paper that is symbolic of where you're going, okay? Where you think you're going. That vision. Getting the thought leaders to start thinking strategically and saying, this is what I want to do. This is the power I'm after, the capabilities that I'm after. You got to get everyone to start putting that on paper and committing to it. Because if you can't write it down, you can't commit. And I found out in government that the more things are written down, the more likely they are to come true. So we got to do that. All of this analytical vision, maturity levels, blueprint of where you're going from both a business architecture and a technology architecture can then become a roadmap. If you want to see some, I have some examples of what a good analytical roadmap would look like. So we can meet offline on that. The one thing that is different than model number 2, where you've done many analytical solutions without this end game in mind, is that in model number 3, your data is more of a strategic asset. So I'll give you some examples of that, just trust me on that, but it's really leverage your data further than you thought was possible. And keeping your overhead down from having a proliferation of data, because just like in your transactional systems, multiple versions of truth is a nightmare. It's not only a nightmare to IT, it's a nightmare to the business community. And so you don't want that same phenomenon of having multiple versions of truth in your analytical environments. So that's the difference in leveraging data as a strategic asset. And then again, there's this incremental process of building what we call a Center of Analytical Excellence. So, and that's where you understand the sustainability issue, which is really what this is all about, is building it right the first time so that your overhead is lower and it is more sustainable with less resources. And the reality is, if it's easier to sustain, then you are dedicating your resources, which still are scarce, to new development than maintaining and sustaining the past. And that's where everyone sees the productivity gain, especially the business people. So, this culture revolution, that's also part of this. So it's not just IT and business people working together, but this is a whole nother mindset. The definitions of a thought leader is the person that recognizes their level of ignorance today and forever and is willing and committed to learning a whole bunch of new stuff that they know they don't know, but they are not ever sure that they know everything they're supposed to know. That's what thought leaders are. And they're almost certain that there's something they're going to learn tomorrow that they didn't know today, and it's going to make them better and more powerful. And they are greedy about power. And the only way to get to that power level you're after is through this cycle and iteration and going from, you know, data to information to knowledge to intuition to insights to knowing the unknown. So there is this commitment to a long journey, this long view. We will show kind of what a 5-year view looks like. There's definitely a different alignment between IT and the business people. And you can't forget that business people do see the power and they get a little greedy and they want to take it all. No, you need the IT people, because the minute you get into data scientists and into big data, it gets much more IT intensive along the way too. So, this ownership model, some of that might have to actually change in statute. But I guarantee you there are young people working at the Capitol, because I used to coach football. My son's now 25 and all of his buddies are working at the Capitol now. So I go over there and I see, you know, they still look like kids to me, even though they're like 25 years old. But they get it. Young people get this stuff, man, and they know that those laws need to change. Those statutes need to change. It's a different world. So it will happen. And then you just have to have this culture of, I'm committed to not only this journey, but I'm committed to a level of iteration and of hard work and gaining understanding and gaining new insights every day. Because I've seen this happen. I've done, you know, big programs at both EDD and CalPERS, and it's just amazing. You sit down, you go through a 3-month scrum of producing all this new data that's never happened before and showing all these new views. And the minute the business people see it, they go, aha! I now know something different, and oh, by the way, I now know what I need from you in the next iteration. Okay? And so you do another iteration, and they do the same exact thing. They go, oh my God, I did not realize this is happening. I now see stuff I've never seen before, and I now know what I need in my next iteration. And so it all becomes very self-sustaining. It's like a phenomenon, and everyone gets into it. But you got to commit to that, okay? So, this commitment, this funding model has to commit 2 different types of funding streams. So we have basically the analytical capabilities on the top, and then we have these foundational services on the bottom. We kind of say this is business and this is technology, but remember, we're joined at the hip up here, and technology people are here, and there certainly are business processes down here. So on this top layer is all these analytical capabilities that you're after. Think about the business project of maybe I'm doing a fraud detection scheme I've never done before. Maybe I'm measuring performance around customer service. You know, maybe I'm measuring revenue over different tax rates. Doesn't matter what those capabilities are, they're all out there. We'll kind of show you a big model. But then I also have to invest in processes, business processes. Even this IT business venture needs a bunch of process. How do I queue up all this work? How do I get data that has been protected, overprotected? How do I start building my data warehouse, this enterprise model, this single solution I'm after? And what kind of tools do I need to start investing in? This doesn't float around in thin air. We're talking servers and storage and tools from Oracle and SAP Business Objects or SAS or whoever. They're all here. They're all out there in the foyer, right? So all of that needs to happen. So our model is, I do a project, I invest a little in everything. So when you cost this out, you're not only costing out the top half, you're costing out some prorated share of the bottom half. Because it doesn't run on thin air. And then I do another project 6 months later, and I get a little bit more, and a little bit more. So at the end of 2 years, I might have done 4 big projects, gotten all kinds of capabilities to the business people that they did not have before, empowered them, but I also built some of the necessary foundational pieces so that this is more sustainable. What people typically do is they build each one of those on their own stovepipe, and they don't have the leverageability that they do under this foundational model. So that's what we're trying to get you to understand and avoid. Make sense? So let's talk about the top half a little bit more. So, if we do enough analysis and we really understand every aspect of our business, and we talk to every thought leader at an organization, financial people, service delivery people, executives, operations, you name it, we can model kind of an end game of here's all the different pillars of technology you might need in terms of analytical stores. And then, based on priority, we may work on a couple as part of that first year, year and a half of cycles. Next year, we work on more, and we get the funding appropriate to start building these out. Now, each one of these has power in and themselves, but the power goes up exponentially. Say this is my financial row, or this is my service delivery row, and I might have customer service here, customer analytics here, and performance analytics here. And so this whole entire row has additional power when I start correlating across the rows. And I start understanding my customer sentiment versus my customer service versus my customer performance in terms of how fast I'm delivering product or services. So you see where the power isn't just within the data mart itself and this capability or this capability. Certainly there is power there, but there's power across a row. Or as I fully build this out year after year, now I have even more correlation power. So this is that data as an asset concept. Because plan 2 is, yes, I get 40 to 50 to 150 different points of power here, but I've done it with only 10 to 15 data stores. Versus the other model where I've done a data store for every possible piece of power I have, and now I have 50 to 100 to 200. I mean, how many times can you correlate in this model? How fast does this go up with your correlation model? So leaving this data as an asset for further use and extension is extremely more powerful than building all these stovepipe systems per scenario, per analytical capability you're after. So what we typically have is, we could have a governance stack, we could have a product, a service, financials, you could have revenue if you're a revenue company. If you happen to be doing a lot of sales and marketing, I'm going to talk about a success story here in a few minutes. How am I doing on time? 10 minutes? Good, I'm just about done. So, even though you're government, you might have some very private sector models. We're over at Lottery, and Lottery is very private sector-y when you consider that they sell tickets, and they do it through retailers, you know? So not every government is a monolithic machine, you know, that that's unto itself. There are government entities that have to be very nimble and dealing with market forces. So, once you have this center of analytical excellence, you are in much better position to leverage big data than without it. So committing to this path to 3 sets you up for big data leverage points that will be fewer and farther between on path 2. So you're better positioned to start doing fraud, waste, and abuse. That's certainly a very common entry point. Security analytics, whoops. Splunk's whole big claim to fame is first with security, and then they started understanding that there's a lot of other uses. But if you haven't done SIEM yet, and you have confidential data, I know it's required at FTB and EDD, but they still have yet to really deliver on it, because the legacy system is keeping them at bay. But there's some real power from big data there. The financials, customer service, operations, all of those things represent in California a ways to leverage this single enterprise center of excellence model that you couldn't do in your stovepipes. So here's my success story number 1. So one of the first investments we made at EDD was in fraud, waste, and abuse. And this was so cool because we got $300,000 grant from the feds. We ponied up a little bit of other money. We actually combined a couple grants. There's a phenomenon in business world called pseudo-dumping. So pseudo is my unemployment tax. So if I am a mid-sized company, we call it 200 to 1,000 people, and I lay people off on a regular basis, real common in agriculture and construction. Every year rains come. Wouldn't it be nice to have some rain right now? So that may not happen this year, but we lay everybody off because of seasonal weather. And therefore I have to pay people unemployment insurance every winter. And the more I pay unemployment insurance, the higher my rate goes up, because all of that comes out of my reserve account as an employer. And so now, after 10 years of business, I'm paying a 4.5% rate, where when I started out, I was paying a 1.5% rate. And that's hurting my bottom line. But that's the business model I subscribe to. Then they found out that, oh, I could buy company B that still has a 1.5 rate, transfer all 1,000 employees over to company B, and magically next year, instead of paying 4.5%, I am paying 1.5%. That's called pseudo-dumping, right? EDD never had the power. Brought in analytics. Bam, we would notice it right away. But we didn't have this power, so we found out that people did this 6 years ago, 10 years ago. Bought company B, transferred 1,000 people over, all the names match exactly, and they've been doing this and avoiding paying their rate. So we went after them, produced the evidence in court, they settled immediately. So this $300,000 investment had an ROI of about 2 days, and then it was making millions and millions of dollars every year for EDD, and we even taught the system to spit out all the evidence so we didn't have to assemble it. So we go to court with all this evidence. Word quickly spread because these people know. They all found out that they could do pseudo-dumping together, and they all found out that EDD was stopping pseudo-dumping together, and their contributions immediately stayed, above board and created hundreds of extra $1 million of revenue. So you can make an investment, you can get good ROI. Just in your basic models. This was not advanced. This was so low on the maturity continuum. So wanted to get that out there. Second example is Commonwealth Bank of Australia. Pretty crappy bank because it was owned by the government. And then, and all 4 national banks of Australia were doing bad. Matter of fact, they even bought one of the national banks because they were better than some of the others. But then, the banking world started changing in the 90s, and ATMs and all kinds of stuff happened that cut costs for the big banks, the private national banks, and it really started hurting the Commonwealth banks. So they privatized in '91, but by 2006 they were still losing their butts. So they brought in a new CIO. He did two things. He re-engineered their legacy system because he knew he had to get to self-service. He knew he had to get to online banking. And he couldn't show their customers their bad data of 20 different legacy systems with 20 versions of truth. But he committed to analytics. And he really started managing not only his own service levels and performance with analytics, but he really started managing customer sentiment. And he really committed to customer experience. Not only did he put it in online systems, but he sent his people to MIT to study what the best way to present online data was to people. And he now dominates not only Australia, but he dominates the whole Asian Pacific and Pacific Rim. So they own Big West Bank and a few other banks, but their online model is better than anyone. It was all through the power of analytics. So, so there is this union between some of your legacy problems and your analytical problems, because your analytics is all based out of your legacy data. And if your legacy data is crap, pardon my French, you know, what do you expect your analytics data to be? So don't forget that one little gotcha there. Okay, so in conclusion, you should be, if you are number one, today you should be committing to go to 2 or 3, I don't care, but there is shorter paths to 3. So, but if you are in that first quadrant, the one thing you better get straight is you got to go. You cannot stay in 1, okay? That's takeaway number 1. It will take executive sponsorship. You do need your Karen Johnsons. EDD, it's Ann Boynton. I mean, CalPERS. See, man, I can't even keep track of my past. EDD. Sharon? Oh, now I'm talking about back then when we had an executive sponsor. Sharon probably was still in more in the transaction phase. I don't think we really had a good executive. Maybe that explains why they're slow on some of this stuff. So it's mostly audit and investigations, to be quite honest. And I can't remember some of the investigators that were just getting crazy with the data we were finding. So, but when you're starting and you're government and you really haven't done this, your ROI is 10 to 1. That's like, CalPERS would take that investment, right? Hey, I can guarantee 10 to 1. You're lucky to get 3 to 2.9. So, and you just have to realize you don't know what you don't know, but you're at least going to start committing to finding out things, okay? It's better to know what you don't know than to not know what you don't know, right? And then tomorrow, you can start harnessing power you have never had. And remember, government intelligence should not be an oxymoron. And that's your 2 choices. Staying ignorant or going for the intelligence powerful prize. So any questions? You have our contact information there. If you want to follow up and have a more in-depth discussion, Dan Peterson, raise your hand, he's right here. He runs the BI practice at PTP. Manuel Luna is our owner here. Raise your hand, Manuel. And I'm Dale Jablonsky. We'd be happy to meet with you and talk about this further. So thank you very much.